The stars had always seemed beautiful to Admiral Park. He had spent 40 years of his life sailing between them, first as a young pilot, then as a captain, and now as the highest-ranking officer in Earth's diplomatic fleet. He had seen nebulas that glowed like fire. He had watched binary suns dance around each other in an endless waltz. He had believed, truly believed, that the universe was a place of wonder. That belief died on a Tuesday. The diplomatic vessel Sol's Promise floated in orbit around Prime, the ancient capital world of the Galactic Council. Stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the massive space station that housed representatives from 47 species. For 100 years, humanity had sent ambassadors here. For 100 years, they had smiled and nodded and accepted their place as a junior species in the galactic community. They had worked hard. They had followed the rules. They had believed that one day they would be accepted as equals. Commander sat at the communications console, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. She was young, barely 30, but she had already proven herself as one of the sharpest officers in the fleet. Had requested her specifically for this mission. He trusted her instincts. "Admiral," she said, her voice tight, "we are receiving a priority transmission from the council chamber. It is marked for immediate broadcast to all human vessels and colonies." Frowned, priority transmissions were rare. They usually meant war or plague or some other disaster. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life. The image showed the great circular chamber of the Galactic Council, where representatives sat in tiered rows that rose toward a domed ceiling painted with stars. At the center stood High Keeper, the ancient leader of the hegemony. His silver skin gleamed under the chamber lights, and his four eyes stared directly into the camera with an expression that had never seen before. It looked almost like guilt. "Citizens of the galaxy," began, his translated voice echoing through the Sol's Promise bridge. "Today, the Council has signed the Accord of Sacrifice. After much deliberation, we have reached an agreement with the Devourer Swarm." Felt his blood turn to ice. The Devourer Swarm, every spacefaring species knew that name. They were a hive mind of billions, a locust plague that traveled from world to world, consuming everything in their path. They had destroyed over 200 civilizations in the past 10,000 years. They could not be reasoned with. They could not be stopped. When the swarm came, you ran or you died. In exchange for 500 years of peace for all Council member species, continued, we have agreed to cede certain territories to the swarm. These territories include the Sol system and all 12 human colony worlds. The bridge went silent. Could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He could hear sharp intake of breath. He could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines, carrying on as if the universe had not just ended. "The swarm will arrive at Earth in 18 standard months," said. "Council peacekeeping forces will establish a blockade around human space to ensure an orderly transition. We thank humanity for their century of service, and we wish them peace in their final days." The transmission ended. The screen went dark. For a long moment nobody spoke, then turned to face and he saw tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, tears of rage. "They sold us," she whispered. "They sold us like animals." Said nothing. He was looking out the viewport at Prime, at the gleaming towers and floating gardens of a civilization that had existed for 50,000 years. A civilization that had just sentenced 8 billion humans to death. "Get me a secure channel to Earth," he said quietly. "Maximum encryption. The President needs to know." The news spread across human space like wildfire. On Earth, people gathered in the streets, staring up at the sky as if they could already see the swarm coming. On the colony worlds, families held each other and wept. In space, human ships drifted aimlessly as their crews tried to process what they had heard. President addressed the United Nations that night. He was a small man, soft-spoken, known more for his skill at negotiation than his strength. But when he stepped up to the podium, something had changed in him. His eyes were dry. His voice was steady, and there was something in his expression that made even the most panicked delegates fall silent. 100 years ago, he began, humanity reached the stars. We were young. We were eager. We wanted nothing more than to join the galactic community and learn from species that had traveled between worlds for. We accepted every insult. We tolerated every slight. We told ourselves that if we worked hard enough, if we proved ourselves worthy, we would eventually be accepted. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. Today, we learned the truth. To the Galactic Council, we were never potential equals. We were resources. We were expendable. We were a sacrifice to be offered when the time was right. A murmur ran through the crowd, raised his hand, and silence returned. The Council believes we will spend our final months in despair. They believe we will tear ourselves apart with riots and panic. They believe that when the swarm arrives, they will find a broken species, easy prey for their hunger. His voice hardened. They are wrong. The murmur became a roar. People were on their feet now, shouting, crying, but there was something else in their voices, something that sounded almost like hope. Humanity has faced extinction before, continued. Ice ages, plagues, wars that threatened to destroy us all. Every time we survived. Every time we came back stronger. The Council has forgotten this. They see us as children, too young to understand the dangers of the universe. He leaned forward, gripping the podium with both hands. Tonight we begin Project Phoenix. Every resource, every scientist, every factory on Earth and in our colonies will work toward one goal: survival. We will not go quietly into the night. We will not accept the death sentence the Council has given us. We will fight. The roar became thunder. In homes across the world, people who had been ready to give up found themselves standing, fists raised, tears in their eyes. 18 months, said. That is how long we have. 18 months to do the impossible. 18 months to build weapons that can stop the swarm. 18 months to prove that humanity is not a species that dies easily. He stepped back from the podium. The galaxy will remember this moment. They will remember the day they tried to kill us, and they will remember what happened next. That night, while the Council's observers reported that Earth had descended into chaos, something very different was happening beneath the surface. In secret facilities around the world, scientists began working on technologies that the galaxy had deemed impossible. In hidden shipyards, engineers started designing vessels unlike anything that had ever flown. In military bases, soldiers trained for a war that everyone else believed was already lost. The Council had given humanity a death sentence. They had expected surrender. They had expected despair. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had slept in human hearts since the first cave dweller had picked up a stone and decided to fight back against a predator. They had awakened humanity's rage. And in 18 months, the galaxy would learn what that meant. Deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, in a facility that did not exist on any map, Doctor had not slept in 3 days. Her eyes burned from staring at holographic displays. Her hands shook from too much coffee and not enough food. But she could not stop. She would not stop. Every hour mattered now. The underground complex stretched for kilometers in every direction. 10,000 scientists worked here, the minds humanity had ever produced. They had been gathered from every nation, every field, every university on Earth. Physicists worked beside biologists. Engineers argued with mathematicians. And at the center of it all stood the woman who had been given an impossible task: save humanity in 18 months. The Council gave us their technology for a century, she told her team during their first meeting. They thought they were giving toys to children. They believed we were too primitive to truly understand what we had been given. She smiled, and there was nothing warm in that expression. They were fools. For 100 years, humanity had studied every piece of alien technology they could get their hands on. They had taken apart engines and weapons and shields. They had asked questions that the council species found amusing. Why does this work? How does it function? Could it be improved? The aliens had laughed at these questions. Their technology had not changed in thousands of years. Why would it? It worked perfectly well. The idea of improvement was almost offensive to them. But humans were different. Humans were never satisfied. Humans always wanted more. Now, in the depths of the Himalayas, his team was putting a century of quiet study to use. They built plasma weapons that hit harder than anything the galaxy had seen. They designed shields that could absorb 10 times more damage than standard council models. They created engines that bent space in ways that alien scientists had declared mathematically impossible. "This should not work," said one of the observers who had been allowed to visit Earth. He was staring at a prototype drive that hummed with barely contained energy. "Our calculations clearly show that this approach is flawed." Shrugged, "Perhaps your calculations were wrong." They had left shortly after, filing a report that the humans were wasting their final months on hopeless projects. This was exactly what wanted him to think. In the asteroid belt, far from the eyes of council observers, something else was taking shape. Fleet Admiral stood in the command center of Shipyard 7, watching through reinforced glass as robotic arms assembled the hull of a vessel that would have been unthinkable just 2 years ago. The ship was 3 kilometers long. Its surface bristled with weapon ports and sensor arrays. Its engines glowed with a faint blue light that spoke of technologies the Council had never seen. It was the first of the Extinction-class dreadnoughts, and it was beautiful. "How many can we build?" asked General IM. She had arrived that morning on a shuttle from Mars, where she was training the ground forces that would defend Earth if the fleet failed. She was a small woman with gray hair and hard eyes, a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts. Nothing surprised her anymore, but even she seemed awed by what she was seeing. 47 dreadnoughts, replied. 300 capital ships, 2,000 support vessels. All will be ready before the swarm arrives. Stared at him. That is impossible. The Council's most advanced shipyards could not build that many ships in 18 months. The Council's shipyards are not running 3 shifts a day with workers who know their families will die if they fail. His voice was flat, matter of fact. Human productivity increases dramatically when extinction is the alternative. Across human space, the same scene repeated itself. Factories that had once made consumer goods now produced weapons. Universities that had studied art and philosophy now focused on physics and engineering. Children learned to pilot drones. Grandparents learned to operate defense systems. Every human being, from the youngest to the oldest, had a role to play. And all of it was hidden. The Council's observers saw only what humanity wanted them to see. They saw riots in the streets, carefully staged for the cameras. They saw suicide rates climbing, based on false reports filed by cooperative doctors. They saw a species falling apart, exactly as expected. "The humans are destroying themselves," reported Ambassador, the assigned to monitor Earth. "Their civilization will collapse within 6 months. The swarm will find nothing but ruins." The Council was pleased. The Accord of Sacrifice had been controversial, and some species had protested the betrayal of humanity. But if the humans destroyed themselves before the swarm even arrived, those protests would fade. Everything was proceeding according to plan. What the Council did not see was the truth. In secret bunkers, families practiced evacuation drills. In hidden valleys, new cities were being built, designed to survive orbital bombardment. In the depths of space, a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen grew larger every day. Commander had been reassigned from the diplomatic corps to military intelligence. Her job was simple: make sure the Council never learned what humanity was actually doing. She was very good at her job. They have increased their surveillance satellites by 15%, she reported to Admiral during one of their secret meetings. They are suspicious, but they do not know what to look for. Can we maintain the deception? For now, but we are running out of time. The final assembly of the fleet will be impossible to hide. Nodded slowly. Then we need to ensure that when they finally see us, it will be too late. The months passed. The swarm drew closer. Council observers continued to report that humanity was dying, killing itself with despair and violence. They had no reason to doubt these reports. After all, every other species had reacted the same way when faced with extinction. Why would humans be any different? But humans were different. They had always been different. On the night before the swarm was scheduled to arrive, Doctor stood in her laboratory, surrounded by her team. They had not slept in a week. They had pushed themselves beyond every limit they had ever known, and they had succeeded. "The weapons are ready," she announced. "The shields are ready, the ships are ready." She looked at the faces around her, seeing exhaustion and fear and something else, something that looked like pride. "Tomorrow, we find out if it was enough." In orbit around Earth, the first Armada assembled for the first time. 300 capital ships, 2,000 support vessels, 47 extinction-class dreadnoughts. They moved into formation with perfect precision, their crews ready, their weapons armed. Fleet Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Soul. Around him, officers monitored their stations with focused intensity. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The Council's blockade fleet, stationed at the edge of the solar system, was the first to see the Armada. Their commanders stared at their sensors in disbelief. Where had these ships come from? How had the humans hidden them? What was happening? Before they could send a warning, broadcast a message on all frequencies. "This is Fleet Admiral of the Terran Defense Force. To the Galactic Council, your blockade is no longer necessary. We will handle the swarm ourselves." A pause. "To the Devourer swarm, you were promised easy prey. You were lied to. Turn back now and you may survive. Continue forward and you will learn why humanity should never have been underestimated." The message echoed across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, alien species watched in confusion and growing fear. The humans were supposed to be dying. The humans were supposed to be helpless. Instead, the humans had built an armada. And now, the swarm was about to find out what that armada could do. The Devourer swarm arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a cold morning in March. They came in numbers that comprehension. Bioships by the thousands, each one a living creature of chitin and acid, bred for nothing but consumption and destruction. For 10,000 years, this sight had meant death for any world unlucky enough to witness it. Captain Lee stood on the bridge of the destroyer Indomitable, watching the swarm approach on her tactical display. She was 34 years old, the youngest captain in the fleet, and she had been given command of one of the forward squadrons. Her orders were simple: hold the line at any cost. "Contact in 15 minutes, reported her sensor officer. "Enemy count is still rising. Current estimate is 12,000 bioships." 12,000, repeated softly. The entire First Armada had only 2,300 vessels. They were outnumbered more than 5 to 1. But numbers were not everything. "All hands battle stations," she announced over the ship-wide comm. "This is the moment we have been preparing for. Every drill, every simulation, every sleepless night has led to this. Today, we fight for Earth. Today, we fight for everyone we love." She paused, and a small smile crossed her face. "And someone put on some music. I want these things to die to something beautiful." A moment later, the opening notes of an ancient symphony filled the bridge. Did not know who had chosen the piece, but she approved. It was fierce and triumphant, exactly what they needed. The swarm made first contact with the outer defense platforms. These automated stations had been positioned throughout the asteroid belt, armed with weapons that the Council had never seen. When the first bioships entered range, the platforms opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through chitin like it was paper. Missiles with warheads designed specifically to target organic matter exploded deep within the swarm's living vessels. In the first 30 seconds of combat, over 200 bioships were destroyed. The swarm hesitated. This had never happened before. Their prey did not fight back. Their prey ran and screamed and died. This was wrong. This was impossible. But the hive mind adapted quickly. It sent more ships forward, accepting losses, probing for weaknesses. The defense platforms were powerful, but they were also stationary. The swarm simply went around them, flowing like water past rocks in a stream. Fleet Admiral watched from the bridge of the Eternal Soul. He had expected this. The platforms were never meant to stop the swarm, only to slow it down and thin its numbers. Now came the real test. "All squadrons advance," he ordered. "Dreadnought Group, hold position and prepare main batteries. We will draw them in." The human fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Destroyers at the front, cruisers behind them, carriers launching fighters by the hundreds. They met the swarm just past Mars' orbit, and the void lit up with weapons fire. Captain Lee found herself face to face with a bioship 3 times the size of her vessel. Its front opened like a mouth, revealing rows of organic cannons that spat acid and biological projectiles. She could see the intelligence in its movements, the cold hunger of a predator that had never known defeat. "All forward batteries fire," she commanded. "Let us show this creature what humanity can do." The Indomitable's plasma cannon spoke as one. The beam struck the bioship's front, burning through chitin and flesh. The creature screamed, a sound that somehow carried through space and into the minds of everyone nearby. It was a scream of pain and confusion, the cry of something that had never experienced real resistance. The bioship died, its body splitting apart in a shower of frozen organic matter. Did not celebrate. There were thousands more behind it. The battle raged for hours. Human ships darted through the swarm formation, their speed and agility allowing them to avoid the worst of the enemy attacks. Shields flickered and held against acid sprays that would have melted council vessels in seconds. Weapons that should have been impossible carved paths of destruction through the hive fleet. But humanity paid a price. The destroyer Braveheart was overwhelmed by a dozen bioships, its shields finally failing under the combined assault. The cruiser Morning Star took a direct hit to its engine core and exploded, taking 300 crew members with it. Fighter pilots died by the dozens, their small craft no match for the larger bioships when caught alone. On the bridge of the Eternal Soul received casualty reports with a face carved from stone. Each death was a failure. Each lost ship was a family that would never see their loved ones again. But he could not afford to mourn. Not yet. Not until the battle was won. "Dreadnought Group," he said quietly, "it is time." The 47 Extinction-class dreadnoughts had been holding position behind the main fleet. Now they moved forward, their massive forms gliding through space with surprising grace. The swarm, sensing new prey, turned to face them. It was the worst mistake the hive mind had ever made. "All dreadnoughts fire main batteries," ordered. Each dreadnought carried a weapon that Doctor had called the cannon. It was a directed energy weapon that drew power from controlled fusion reactions, focusing it into a beam that burned hotter than the surface of a star. The Council had declared such weapons impossible. They had said that no ship could generate enough power, that no material could channel such heat. They had been wrong. 47 beams of pure white light lanced across the void. Where they touched swarm vessels, nothing remained. Bioships simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. The beams swept across the swarm formation like scythes, cutting down hundreds of vessels in seconds. The hive mind recoiled. It had never felt such fear. It had never lost so many in so short a time. For the first time in 10,000 years, the devourer swarm considered retreat. But it was too late. The human fleet was all around them now, pressing the attack, giving them no room to escape. Day after day, the battle continued. The swarm threw everything it had at the humans, and the humans held. On the 11th day, it was over. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the Soul's Promise, looking out at a field of debris that stretched for millions of kilometers. Broken bioships drifted in the void, their organic forms frozen and still. The Devourer swarm, terror of the galaxy, had been shattered. "Casualties?" he asked quietly. 47 ships lost," replied Commander. Her voice was hoarse. She had not slept in days. 12,000 crew members dead. Closed his eyes. 12,000. 12,000 humans who would never go home. 12,000 families who would receive the worst possible news. But 8 billion had survived. Earth still stood. Humanity would continue. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies. I want the galaxy to hear this." The transmission went out across the stars. On every world, in every ship, every being with access to communications watched and listened. "This is Admiral Park of the Terran Defense Force," he announced. Behind him, visible through the viewport, the wreckage of the swarm fleet drifted silently. "The Devourer swarm has been defeated. Earth stands. Humanity survives." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold. "The Galactic Council gave us to the swarm as a sacrifice. They expected us to die quietly. They expected us to accept extinction without a fight." He leaned forward. "They were wrong, and now we have questions for the Council, many questions." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, silence reigned. The impossible had happened. The swarm had been broken. And humanity, the species that everyone had written off as acceptable losses, was still standing. What came next, nobody knew. But one thing was certain: the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 30,000 years. Its walls were made of crystal that sang when touched by light. Its ceiling displayed a map of every known star system, each one marked with the flag of whatever species claimed it. For this room had been the center of galactic civilization, the place where decisions were made that affected trillions of lives. Now it was filled with fear. Ambassador Shin walked into the chamber with her head held high. She was a small woman, barely reaching the chest of most alien species, but she carried herself like a giant. Behind her walked 4 members of the Terran Defense Force in full combat armor, their weapons visible but not raised. They were an honor guard, nothing more. But every delegate in the chamber knew what those soldiers represented. They represented a fleet that had destroyed the Devourer swarm. They represented weapons that could burn worlds. They represented a species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction and had pushed back. High Keeper rose from his seat as approached the central platform. His silver skin seemed pale, and his 4 eyes could not quite meet her gaze. "Ambassador Shin," he said, his translated voice echoing through the chamber. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I wish to express our surprise at humanity's survival. We are pleased that—" "Stop!" The single word cut through the chamber like a blade. Fell silent, his mouth still open. Looked around the room, taking in the faces of delegates from 47 species. Some looked frightened. Others looked angry. A few, mostly from the smaller species that had always been pushed to the margins of galactic society, looked almost hopeful. "I did not come here to listen to lies," said. "I came here to deliver a message." She activated her personal display, and a holographic image appeared above her head. It showed the Accord of Sacrifice, the document that had condemned humanity to death. Names and signatures of every species that had voted in favor scrolled across the display. 18 months ago, this council signed our death warrant," continued. "You gave us to the swarm like farmers giving cattle to a predator. You did not ask us. You did not warn us. You simply decided that 8 billion human lives were an acceptable price for your peace." A murmur ran through the chamber. The prime calculator, a being of crystal and light that spoke through mathematical equations translated into language, rose from its seat. The decision was logical, it stated. Humanity was a minor species with limited resources. The swarm required feeding. Your sacrifice would have bought you 500 years, interrupted. 500 years of safety while the swarm grew stronger on our flesh. 500 years to prepare for the day when you became the sacrifice instead. She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Did you really think the swarm would stop with us? Did you really believe that a species that has consumed 200 worlds would be satisfied with just 13? The calculator had no response. You called us a minor species, said. You called us children playing with toys we did not understand. You looked at our short lives and our young civilization and you saw weakness. She paused. You were wrong. Another holographic display appeared. This one showed the 12 human colony worlds, now surrounded by defense platforms and patrol fleets. It showed the shipyards of Mars, still producing new vessels at incredible rates. It showed the second, third, and fourth armadas, fully assembled and waiting in deep space. This is what humanity built in 18 months, said. While you watched us through your spy satellites and laughed at our despair, we were creating weapons that your scientists said were impossible. While you filed reports about riots and suicides, we were training an army that could match any in the galaxy. She looked directly at. You had 50,000 years to advance your technology. We matched it in a century. You had 30,000 years to build your fleets. We surpassed them in 18 months, and you still thought we were the weak ones. The chamber was silent. Could see delegates exchanging nervous glances, calculating odds, wondering what humanity would do next. Some were clearly expecting revenge. Some were probably planning how to strike first, before humanity could strike at them. She decided to surprise them all. Humanity is not here for vengeance, she announced. The silence became confusion, even looked surprised. Do not misunderstand, continued. We have not forgotten what you did. We will never forget. The names of every human who died because of your betrayal are carved into monuments on every one of our worlds. Our children learn about the accord of sacrifice before they learn to read. She stepped forward, and despite her small size, every delegate in the chamber leaned back. But we are not like you. We do not believe in feeding the weak to the strong. We do not sacrifice those who cannot defend themselves. We do not build our safety on the corpses of others. She raised her hand, and a new hologram appeared. This one showed a document, written in standard galactic and signed with a single human symbol. This is the Charter of the Terran Alliance, explained. It is an offer of protection to any species that wishes to join us. Under this charter, humanity pledges to defend its allies against any threat, internal or external. We pledge to share our technology freely. We pledge to treat every member species as an equal, regardless of their age or power or wealth. Murmurs erupted throughout the chamber. Protection, shared technology, equality. These were concepts that the Galactic Council had never operated on. The strong dominated the weak. The old controlled the young. That was how things had always been. In return, continued, we ask only one thing, loyalty. Join the Alliance and you will never stand alone again. Betray the Alliance and you will face the consequences. She looked around the room one final time. The Galactic Council betrayed us. You showed us exactly what you think of species that cannot protect themselves. So we are offering the galaxy a choice. Those who wish to continue as they always have may do so. The Council may continue its games of power and sacrifice. Her voice hardened. But those who want something better may come to us. Those who are tired of living in fear, of wondering when they will be the next sacrifice, may find refuge with humanity. We cannot change the past. We cannot undo what was done to us. But we can build a future where no species ever has to face extinction alone. She turned and began to walk toward the exit. Her guards fell into step behind her. "Wait," called a voice. It was Ambassador, the who had monitored Earth during the silent years. "What about us? What about the species that voted for the Accord? Will you not seek punishment?" Paused at the door. She turned her head just slightly, not quite looking back. "That depends entirely on you," she said. "Show us that you have learned. Show us that you can be better than you were, and perhaps in time forgiveness will be possible." She walked out of the chamber without another word. Behind her, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. Everything they had known, everything they had believed about power and security and survival, had just been challenged by a species they had tried to kill. And across the galaxy, in the shadowed halls of minor species and forgotten colonies, beings who had always lived in fear began to look up at the stars with new hope. The humans had survived, the humans had won. And now, the humans were offering something that the galaxy had never seen before, a chance for the weak to become strong. The reckoning had begun, but it would not end in blood and fire. It would end in something far more dangerous to the old order. It would end in change. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Saul. 5 years since the Devourer swarm had been broken. 5 years since Ambassador Shin had walked into the Galactic Council chamber and changed everything. The galaxy was unrecognizable. Fleet Admiral stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Soul, watching the stars drift past. His hair had turned gray in the years since the war, and lines had formed around his eyes that had not been there before. Command had aged him. Responsibility had aged him. But he would not trade his position for anything in the universe. Through the massive viewport, he could see the fleet assembled around him. Human dreadnoughts flew alongside vessels from a species of amphibians that had joined the Alliance in its first year. Cruisers from the Collective, former servants of the who had broken free after seeing humanity's example, held formation with destroyers from Earth. Even a handful of ships from the who had once been allies of the swarm itself, had found their way into the fleet. "Supreme Commander," said Admiral, his second in command. She had been a captain during the Battle of Saul, one of the heroes who had held the line when everything seemed lost. Now she commanded the Third Armada, the fastest and most dangerous strike force in the Alliance. "The final reports from the border are in." Turned from the viewport, and the hegemony has fractured completely. 3 of their core worlds have declared independence. 2 more are negotiating to join the Alliance. His voice was neutral but could see satisfaction in her eyes. High Keeper has fled to the outer territories. His government no longer exists. Nodded slowly. They had not been defeated in battle. Humanity had never fired a shot at them. Instead, their empire had simply fallen apart as their subject species realized that they did not have to be subjects anymore. The Alliance offered protection and equality. They had offered only domination. The choice was not difficult. What about the still hiding in their core systems? They have not responded to any communications in over a year, shook her head. Intelligence believes they are terrified of us. They think we are waiting for the right moment to attack. Are we? Met his eyes. You tell me, Supreme Commander. Was quiet for a long moment. They had been among the loudest voices in favor of the Accord of Sacrifice. Their calculations had predicted humanity's destruction with 99% certainty. They had treated human lives as numbers on a spreadsheet, acceptable losses to be traded for temporary peace. Part of him wanted to destroy them. Part of him wanted to burn their crystal cities and shatter their cold, calculating minds. He could do it. The Alliance had the power. No one would stop them. But that was not what humanity had become. "We could destroy them," he said finally. "We have the ships, the weapons, the justification. No species in the galaxy would blame us for taking revenge." Waited. But that would make us no better than them. Turned back to the viewport. We were betrayed because they saw us as lesser. They believed that our lives had no value, that we could be sacrificed without consequence. If we do the same to them, we prove that they were right about the nature of power. The strong consume the weak. The cycle continues forever. He placed his hand against the cool surface of the viewport. Humanity broke that cycle. We showed the galaxy that strength does not have to mean cruelty, that power does not have to mean domination. He looked at. We will not throw that away for the satisfaction of revenge. Nodded slowly. Then what do we do with them? We wait, we watch, and when they are ready to rejoin the galaxy as equals rather than masters, we welcome them. Smiled just slightly. That will be a far more fitting punishment than any weapon we could build. On Earth, in the great memorial plaza that had been built where the United Nations once stood, President Moon walked slowly along the wall of names. The wall stretched for kilometers, its surface covered with the names of every human who had died because of the betrayal. Scientists who had worked themselves to death in the underground laboratories. Soldiers who had fallen in the Battle of Saul. Civilians who had died in the chaos of those terrible 18 months. Stopped before one name. The president who had stood before the world and declared that humanity would not go quietly. The man who had started Project Phoenix. He had died 3 years ago, his heart finally giving out after years of stress and grief. But his legacy lived on in every ship that flew, every alliance that was forged, every life that was saved. She laid flowers at the base of the wall. "We remember," she said softly. "We always remember." Above her, ships streaked across the sky. Human ships and allied ships, vessels from species that had once been enemies and species that had always been friends. They flew together now, united by a bond that the old galaxy would never have understood. Doctor had returned to her laboratory, but her work had changed. Instead of weapons, she now developed technologies that could terraform dead worlds and cure diseases that had plagued other species for. The same mind that had created the cannon now worked to make the galaxy a better place. Admiral Park had retired to a small house by the ocean on Earth. He spent his days fishing and watching the waves, trying to find peace after a lifetime of war. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes he dreamed of the Battle of Saul and woke up screaming. But he was learning to live with his memories, one day at a time. Commander had become an ambassador herself, traveling from world to explain humanity's vision for the future. She had a gift for making other species understand what the Alliance truly meant, what it could offer them. Under her guidance, the Alliance had grown from a handful of members to over 30, with more joining every year. Captain Lee commanded a dreadnought now, the Unconquerable Spirit. She still played music on her bridge during combat drills, though real combat had become rare. The Alliance was too strong for most threats, and those that remained learned quickly that attacking human ships was a fatal mistake. General IM had trained a new generation of soldiers, humans and aliens alike. They fought not for conquest but for defense, protecting the weak and maintaining the peace. Some had called her army the Guardians of the Alliance, and the name had stuck. The galaxy had betrayed Earth. They had expected humanity to break. Instead, humanity had risen, not as conquerors, not as tyrants, but as something the universe had never seen before. They had become protectors. They had become builders. They had become a light in the darkness that other species could follow. Standing on the observation deck of the Eternal Soul, Fleet Admiral looked out at the stars. He thought about everything humanity had lost. He thought about everything they had gained. He thought about the long road ahead, the challenges that still waited, the work that would never truly be done. The stars no longer trembled in fear. They trembled in awe. They trembled at the sight of a species that had been pushed to the very edge of extinction and had responded not with hatred but with hope. Humanity had been betrayed. Humanity had suffered. Humanity had bled. But humanity had survived, and in surviving, they had changed the galaxy forever. The story was not over. It would never be over. There would always be new challenges, new enemies, new obstacles to overcome. But humanity would face them all, together with their allies, standing as equals among the stars. The galaxy would remember the betrayal, but more importantly, they would remember what came after. They would remember the day humanity chose mercy over vengeance, hope over despair, and unity over division. They would remember that even in the darkest moment, humanity had found a way to shine. And the stars, which had once seemed so cold and distant, now felt a little closer, a little warmer, a little more like home. The end.